EVO. Welcome back to The Devil Within. This is part 2 of Spring and Fall to a Young Child, and our re-release of Season 1 in support of the MGM Plus docuseries Let the Devil In. By the time you're listening, Episode 4 will have dropped, so all episodes are in release, and you can go binge the entire series. Like everyone else who lived in Jefferson at that time, Dave remembers that night in January very vividly.
So the night of the murder, I was actually at my girlfriend's house. She was 2 years older than me, so she had her license, and I remember coming down White Rock Boulevard at whatever time it was, cop cars all over the place. And for a quiet town, you knew that what the heck happened? And so you have to pass Tommy's house in order to get to my house. Like I said, there was emergency vehicles all over the place. What the heck is going on? And then drive home. And at that time, of course, we didn't have cell phones or anything, so no one knew what was going on, but you could just see commotion outside. And then in retrospect, to think that here we are driving down the street, and at that time, he still hadn't been found at that point. So that's why there were so many emergency vehicles. Obviously, they found his mom, but at that point, he was still at large.
So on the evening of January 8th, 1988, a cold, snowy Friday, Tommy was out late. Yes, it was a Friday night, but remember that he was 14. Being out late at that age in that household was a problem. Apparently, it was Mrs. Sullivan's turn to confront her son about the drastic change that had occurred in his behavior and in his choice of company as of late. Maybe they'd recently gotten his latest report card and it wasn't great news. Or the wrestling coach had called to let them know that Tommy had been benched. It might very well have been an inquiry from Father Fitzpatrick himself, wondering if Tommy would be at Mass on Sunday. He'd missed the last 2 weeks, and it really wasn't like him at all. According to Mr. Sullivan's statement, Tommy had been at odds with the entire family for a few weeks before the murder. Everything was a fight. Everything was a crisis, or nothing mattered at all. Serious questions of concern were ignored or laughed at by Tommy. His bedroom door was always locked, his family shut out. His new taste in music was coupled with an equally new desire to listen to it at full volume. And speaking of his new music collection, where did he get it? His parents certainly didn't buy him any of those cassette tapes. Either he got copies from his friends, or more likely, he shoplifted them from one of the giant music stores that used to exist in the Rockaway Mall. The idea that they were stolen comes from the fact that he had all the original packaging, including the cover art and the lyrics, instead of the generic blank tape with handwritten labels. So, Betty Ann Sullivan was waiting up for Tommy to get home. She passed the hours doing the family's laundry and watching television. Then she hears the door open. She rises to meet her son as he enters the downstairs living area from the garage via the laundry room. She asks where he's been, if he's okay. Does he want to talk about anything? A mother's concern at odds with a parent's assertion of dominance. It's a balancing act you're only familiar with if you have children. Tommy's reaction is unknown, at least his initial reaction. All we know is what happened next.
The next day, what we heard is that Tommy beat his mom to death with a barbell, and then he was found dead in the neighbor across the street by his shed with his throat slit. You're just, well, how could this be? Not in our town, and not him. Like, how did somebody do that?
So Dave Esposito is a great kid. Still friends with him today. He's got a great family. And his brother Chuck and his parents, they lived across the street from the Kennedys, just down from the Sullivans, just down from the Eastmans. It was a whole, just a beautiful community there. Dave was a year older than me in high school. Great athlete, great student. He was also a football player. He was like 130-pound tailback when he was a senior in high school, and he played like a fucking lunatic. Just one of the toughest kids that you'll meet. Just, an Italian Jersey boy, good Catholic family, and a pimp. Did you hear him in this? He just casually dropped it. Yeah, my girlfriend was 2 years older than me, so she had her license. That means he was 15 dating a 17-year-old. Yeah. And he was out late. The murders happened at like 10:30, right? And he was just getting driven home by his girlfriend. At 15. All right. That's the kind of cat that Dave Esposito was growing up. And, like I said, good friend, great family. Can't say enough about him. And he was willing to participate in the podcast where not a lot of other people were. So thanks, buddy. So then we hear from Dave about his experience coming home, his girlfriend dropping him off. And we hear it from the point of view of a contemporary of mine, right? That's the first kind of like kid version of it that we hear when he turns onto the street and he's like, what? Like all of these emergency vehicles. And he's like, it's a quiet town where nothing goes on. So he knew that something major had happened. And he was right. And he says it before cell phones, before any of that, like nobody knew what was going on. And so he said, so the next morning, that's when we start hearing it. And that's what I've been trying to kind of impart to people, both in my interview in the TV show and doing these Redux episodes is, in a time before cell phones and a time before internet, it was a literal game of telephone. What did you hear? What did you hear? You're getting busy signals from all your friends. Finally you get through to someone. And for those of you who don't know, a busy signal was when you had a landline, and if someone was talking on it before there was call waiting, you would just get a me busy signal. That's it. Nothing you could do. You just had to wait. So he says, we heard that he, killed his mom with a barbell. And you hear his inflection on that. Like, what? Like this good Catholic boy talking about another good Catholic boy doing this unthinkable thing. And then he ran across the street to the backyard of a neighbor's house by a shed and slit his throat. And again, with Dave, you can hear the disbelief in his voice. And that is how we all felt. That is the wave of understanding, disbelief, and I guess sadness that swept across the town over those telephone lines over the next 48 hours, I would imagine. And it was an experience that I won't forget because, much like in the poem, Spring and Fall to a Young Child, it was at this kind of line of demarcation in terms of my understanding of the town where I grew up. There's before the Sullivan murders, and then there's after. Because it was my generation, it was a kid my age, it was in my town, and it was something that I hadn't contemplated as even possible. And those sentiments were shared by everybody my age, That, not that we were sophisticated emotionally enough yet to talk about it. We were just like, what the fuck, you believe this? But what was behind all of that was things are changing, we're growing up, loss of innocence. And we didn't really have the tools to navigate that yet, and I'm sure our parents were thinking the same thing behind the scenes, trying to outwardly project confidence and stability. But inside, there was no manual for this. Like, here's how you deal with a teenage satanic murder in a hometown that claimed the life of a mom and a 14-year-old. What do you do? So that's where we end up. That's where we wound up. And we were left trying to figure out what happened. And so everyone started taking a really long look at Tommy Sullivan and his life leading up to that point. Athletics, academics, religion. And that life was dominated by athletics, by academics, and by religion. And there was no time for Tommy to simply be a 14-year-old kid. At least that's my opinion.
He probably convinced his mother that he was going up to bed, and she went into the garage to finish the laundry. Instead of going upstairs, Tommy quietly followed his mother into the garage, picked up a dumbbell, and waited in a dark corner until she passed by with a basket full of warm clothes. Then he caved in his mother's skull with the dumbbell and stabbed her 37 times with his Boy Scout knife. Shortly thereafter, as he was calmly washing his hands in the bathroom sink, he had a short conversation with his little brother who had gotten up. "Go back to bed, Brian. It's just a small cut on my hand. Mommy's taking me to the hospital." That was the last anyone saw of Tommy Sullivan. He meant to kill his brother that night.
his father, too. The next thing Tommy did was set the living room couch on fire and steal his dad's car. He would be dead by morning. Remember Mr. Sullivan telling detectives that Tommy had been at odds with the entire family for the previous 2 weeks? We know that the beginning of Tommy's transformation began with the assignment in history class 6 weeks earlier and his introduction to Lance. Lance, in turn, introduced Tommy to Satanism and strange goings-on in the woods near Clinton Road. Let's revisit those 6 weeks and get a definitive timeline of events and try to make sense of what happened. Tommy Sullivan was living the life of your average Catholic teenager in New Jersey, which is to say he was exposed to strict dogmatic teachings on a daily basis, including the duties of an altar boy, CCD classes, regular confession, and Bible study. He was also a serious athlete, which may sound insane to the uninitiated until you're made aware of how seriously the sport of wrestling is taken in New Jersey. Yes, he was only 14, but by then he had years of training under his belt, and along with Catholicism, wrestling was a way of life. He had practice every day during the season, with matches at least twice a week and tournaments during the holidays. Off-season training was year-round, with workouts and diets that were followed, well, religiously. Then there was the mounting pressure that a boy of his emotional capacity just couldn't identify, let alone deal with. He didn't realize that he was desperate for some kind of release, for permission to just take a break from his schedule, from his responsibilities, from his life. Then a seemingly benign Thanksgiving break history assignment leads to an introduction to a new friend, Lance, that would change the course of his life. Lance chooses to do a report on Satanism, and Tommy learns about a whole new world. A world of freedom, a world of rebellion, and a world of mystery that he begins to explore. It is believed that Tommy meets and is influenced by the boyfriend of Lance's older sister. This man supposedly gives Tommy his copy of the Satanic Bible and introduces him to heavy metal music. Although a skeptic, according to his own writings, Tommy agrees to join Lance on an excursion to Clinton Road, where meetings of a secret group of satanic worshippers gather at the ruins of an ancient castle to perform rituals that may or may not involve the paranormal. Between Thanksgiving and Christmas, Tommy begins to exhibit behavioral changes of some concern. Nothing too serious yet, but enough to notice. He's listening to a new kind of music, he's spending time with new friends, maybe he misses a wrestling practice. Then, just before Christmas of 1987, he returns to Clinton Road for unknown reasons, presumably to attend another ritual in the woods. And then his descent accelerates to the point that he's nearly unrecognizable, at least in personality, within a very short period of time. He shuts out his parents. He neglects his commitments to the church. He gets benched by his wrestling coach for being too aggressive and violent on the mat. He even stops spending time with Lance. The final 10 days of Tommy's life aren't very well understood. They were either so terribly normal as to not elicit any specific memories, or people don't want to discuss them because very obvious signals were ignored and people want to protect themselves. Then, on the evening of January 8th, Tommy returned from somewhere, no one knows from where, and brutally killed his mother. Then this otherwise well-adjusted kid from a good family who excelled academically and athletically went into the woods and nearly decapitated himself.
The demands of school, the demands of being competitive, somebody could absolutely snap.
It may seem like we can't answer the burning question of why. We can connect the dots. A normal kid quietly, anonymously struggling with enormous external pressures has the misfortune of running into the exact wrong influences at the exact wrong time. It all becomes too much, and terrible, terrible things happen. That's the basic conclusion that was drawn by law enforcement, and it's the conclusion that has been accepted by all involved for the last 3 decades. Understand that no post hoc knitting together of tragic events will ever be perfect. There's no way to find an answer to every question. But were all the correct questions asked? For example, in a community whose identity was tied to wrestling excellence, was there adequate examination of possible ties to Tommy's status as an athlete?
Is our police department savvy enough to handle something like this? Because we lived in a small town and didn't have the resources to really crack cases.
There are several reports concerning wrestlers who couldn't handle the demands of the sport. Academic and athletic achievement, both of which were of supreme importance to Tommy, has in many cases led to sleep deprivation. Lack of proper rest, especially after rigorous physical activity, would lead to depression.
Yeah, it was definitely something that we dealt with. Again, at the time, you don't realize it. You just want to be the best that you could be.
Wrestlers struggling with depression often turn to binge eating as a release valve. Overeating then necessitates cutting weight to stay on the mat. The physical toll that unsafe weight loss takes on the body is extreme, and the mental and emotional tolls are even worse. A wrestler such as this is often left feeling lost, defeated, and hopeless. Remember the quote from Jay Moore? That's why wrestlers don't have friends.
So you're not really going to parties, you're not doing that normal social stuff. You're just focused on being competitive.
Was any of this true in Tommy's case? Did anyone even ask? Probably. As stated in an earlier episode, Detective Hart was dedicated and thorough, and there's no reason to believe that he would have neglected this avenue of inquiry. The question is, did he get honest answers? Or did he run into a syndicate bent on self-preservation? Of course not. We'd never encourage a child to cut weight like that. We'd know if he were struggling. The argument could be made that he simply had too much on his plate and that his parents should have been aware of the stresses that their son was experiencing. But then Tommy had always been an overachiever, and he'd always thrived under pressure. Always. And it all happened so quickly. 6 weeks. More than that, 6 weeks over the holidays. Think about the most recent holiday season, roughly Thanksgiving through New Year's. It flew past, right? If you have young children, it may have seemed a little longer, but usually it feels like you blink, and it's the new year and time to go back to work. But that's all it took for Tommy to become a murderer. That harsh reality doesn't quite fit into the version of events the police and the prosecutors would have us all believe. And they don't tell you that Tommy's younger brother, Brian, committed suicide at the age of 21, or that Betty Ann's sister became a cloistered nun in the aftermath of the crime, having spent over a decade studying child psychology and psychopathy in a fruitless attempt to gain some insight into the horror that befell her sister. The authorities even allowed her to see the crime scene photographs. What could she have discovered that drove her to choose such an extreme lifestyle? And that quote from Jay Moore. That's why wrestlers don't have friends. So in Jay Moore's understanding, someone who lived through it, simply being a wrestler, being a high-achieving athlete in the sport of wrestling in New Jersey, that was enough for him to say, that's why wrestlers don't have friends. Now, what do you get if you then mix in the responsibility of being a straight-A student and the responsibility of being heavily involved in your church? What's left for Tommy? What's left of Tommy to be Tommy? So that's been my argument from the beginning. That's what's explored more as the podcast goes forward. That's what was explored in the TV show. All episodes are available now to binge, by the way. And that's what we'll discuss more later on. But on the next episode, we take a pretty sharp left turn into the New Jersey folklore as we explore the origins of the myth of the New Jersey Devil. I hope you're enjoying these episodes as much as I've liked recording them. It's been really interesting and really fun to kind of revisit where I was when I was creating the podcast, where I was emotionally, where I was creatively. So I've been having a good time, and I hope you have too. So that'll do it for Spring and Fall to a Young Child Redux Part 2. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with a friend or family member. Rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps more than you know. And tune in to MGM Plus, where you can binge all 4 episodes of the docuseries Let the Devil In. Until next time, stay safe out there. The Devil Within is an EVO production, recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. For The Devil Within, I'm your writer and host, Brandon Morgan.